Bringing the meeting back to order and moving along, we are on item J2. This is in regards to the Marin Valley Mobile Country Club, and this is going to be led by, you looked over there, Chris, and now you're getting me all confused, by Christopher Blanc, our Public Works Director and City Engineer. Chris, would you like to start it off? You're giving it back.
Mayor, if I could just a couple opening, sorry our notes to you were inaccurate, but just a couple of opening comments for perhaps folks that maybe didn't read the staff report. It's, it was a lot of information or just hearing things sort of word of mouth and rumor control. This is a presentation only tonight. There was no ask of the council to take any acute action or rent increases or any other dramatic request of the council. This is a presentation only. This is the only forum we can do that, an open session, right, for you. And no doubt it's made some people uncomfortable, but that's not our intent. It's to inform the council, who has ultimate responsibility for the fiscal management of the entire city, which includes the city's role in the Marin Valley Mobile Country Club. So this is a presentation daylighting some issues. Some have come from council direction, and you're going to hear about where you've received a report and adopted a report on infrastructure, and then we've costed that out. And then, of course, as we are responsible to do so, to then matriculate that out over a long period of time. And when we did that, some concerns in the numbers were brought or appeared. So this is to daylight those concerns to the council. Tonight's ultimate recommendation, I'm going to say the end before we even get started, is that we need to study this more. Staff needs more time to study this. The park residents need more time to study this. Anyone else interested in the city of Novato obviously has a role here too. It is not a mutually exclusive relationship between the city council and the park residents. All of Novato, as the taxpayers, of course, have an interest, and the council needs more time. It's too much tonight. It's too complex. So the recommendation at the end of the presentation is simply to ask the council to direct us to schedule a in-depth study session. And we are asking for July. Of course, it's at the council's purview, but our thoughts are to get through the budget season, labor negotiations, and other things that are occurring now. We all want to be able to devote the most bandwidth to this, so then we can all collectively get together in July, have a less formal, a more work study session than a formalized council meeting where things can sometimes be difficult to have open communication. So that's what tonight is, nothing else. There's no hidden agenda, no request for the council to take some immediate action at the surprise of its residents without everyone being more fully informed. And frankly, we probably won't get it done in July either, right? It's far too big of an issue, and the multitude of questions and the answers that will be required to get those will likely take more than July. So that's the process tonight. Hopefully that frames and alleviates some of the concerns out there. We know we have a lot of people logged in online and a lot of people here present tonight. The request is simply we all need to study this more. So I'll turn it over to the Public Works Director, Mr. Blanc, who will walk us through the presentation tonight.
Great, and thank you for that clarification. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members, and thank you to the members of the public who've joined us. On the first slide I have here, for folks who are following along in the clubhouse at Marin Valley, the general manager worked to get this city council meeting shown on the big screen there. However, there is no capability in the clubhouse for residents to be able to comment using the clubhouse system. So you'll have to use your own devices if you're following along at the clubhouse. You can join by Zoom at the link on the screen, password and meeting ID, or you can call the number. And I have the same screen at the end of the presentation. I'll put it up and I'll leave it up there so that folks can comment if they want to, if they're following along at the clubhouse. And this goes if they're following along at home as well. So as the city manager mentioned, tonight we have a presentation regarding the primarily financial management of Marin Valley Mobile Country Club. And staff's only recommendation to the council this evening is that they consider scheduling a workshop study session in July of this year to start to discuss and identify strategies to support the long-term fiscal sustainability of the park. And as I get into this, there's almost 30 years of history between the city of Novato and Marin Valley Mobile Country Club. So I did my best to try to pull as much pertinent information I could from my research and put it into the staff report, but still you can't fit 30 years into 9 pages, and it's even more condensed in this presentation. So I'm not trying to gloss over things, but I'm trying to keep it relatively succinct and really highlight the main points, but certainly happy to get into any details during questions. So for folks that aren't aware, Marin Valley Mobile Country Club is a 315-unit, about 63-acre mobile home park, and it's located at 100 Marin Valley Drive on the southeast side of Novato. It is an age 55 and over senior community with a little over 400 residents. And per the agreements that govern the operation of the park, over a third of the spaces at the park are required to be rented to tenants with very low to moderate incomes. And actually, per the last certification that we got from the park manager, it appears that over half of the spaces are actually required to folks meeting those income thresholds. The park has several amenities, including a clubhouse, 2-story clubhouse. It's about 15,000 square feet, swimming pool, hot tub. You can see in the photos there. There's also a locker room, gym, laundry facility, and 2 boat and RV storage lots. And the history of the park, it was originally built by a private developer in 2 phases in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And actually, in doing some more research, it looks like there was a smaller 3rd phase that came on maybe in the late 70s or early 80s, but largely built in 2 phases. And most of the infrastructure at the park that supports the residents there in the spaces was installed for the most part between about 1969 and 1972. The park was privately owned until March of 1997 when it was acquired by the Novato Finance Authority, which was a joint powers authority between the city of Novato and the Novato Redevelopment Agency. Prior to the purchase by the Novato Finance Authority, residents at the park had formed the Park Acquisition Corporation of Marin Valley Mobile Country Club, the PAC, as we refer to it, with the intent of purchasing the park and to preserve the affordability of senior housing. So NFA, at the request of the PAC, acquired the park, and then it was the PAC's intent to then acquire the park from NFA. Following NFA's purchase of the park, the city and the PAC entered into a delegation agreement, and that outlined the control and the management of the park, who would have what responsibility. And there's quite a bit more detail in the staff report about this. I just didn't want to have too many screens of bullet points. One of the agreements that comes out of the delegation agreement is a management agreement, and that's between the PAC and the Helsing Group. And the Helsing Group is the property manager that currently oversees the day-to-day operations, collection of rent, tenant relations, enforcement of rules, and the like at the park. So just quickly about financing, Novato Financing Authority acquired the park through bond financing, about $17 million in bonds. And NFA transferred title to the city of Novato in March of 2011 with the dissolution of redevelopment agencies by the state. And so the city of Novato owns the park in fee as of that time. The city refinanced the park in December of 2012 with a Bank of Marin loan and then repaid all outstanding bond debt in January of 2013. So as of early 2013, the loan for the park that the city holds is with the Bank of Marin only. There's no outstanding bond debt. And it's important to note that all of the bond and loan debt service payments for the acquisition of the park, as well as the operations and maintenance and capital costs at the park, have been paid out of the mobile home space rental revenues that the city receives. So there hasn't been any large city support of the park, city fund support of the park. It's coming from park revenues. So I mentioned the delegation agreement. The park is currently being operated under the second restated and amended delegation agreement, and that's dated June 4th, 2013. There's a few different documents out there, so I'm just trying to make sure as we get along in this conversation later this year that everyone is referring to the current agreements. And ultimately, the city, as the owner, is responsible for the operations and financial control of the park, ultimately. The PAC is delegated the right to operate the park for the purpose of providing a portion of the spaces to residents with very low to moderate incomes and generally oversee the work of the property manager that's delegated from the PAC's responsibilities to the Helsing Group. So I'm going to talk a little bit now. Actually, I'm going to talk quite a bit about the infrastructure. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of the conversation here tonight. So the utility distribution facilities within the park are almost entirely owned by the city and private to the park. So in most neighborhoods, you would have PG&E gas and electric service that would come up your street. It would come up to a meter, and then it would be private from the meter into your home. In Marin Valley, the PG&E gas and electric service comes to the main gate at the end of Marin Valley Drive where the cul-de-sac is, and then it becomes privately owned by the city of Novato all the way up and over the hill and to every single space within the park. So where there's about 2.3, 2.4 miles of paved streets within the park, that gives you an idea. That's about the same mileage of utilities without the lateral connections to go to all of those 315 homes. So there's a huge amount of private utilities within the park, and that includes a good portion of the potable water distribution system, the sanitary sewer facilities, so collection, pump station, and the force mains that take that pumped effluent up and over the hills, the storm drains, culverts, drainage ditches, and I mentioned the natural gas and the electrical, including the transformers. So when a transformer goes out at the park, within the park, you don't see PG&E trucks rolling in there and replacing the transformer. The city has to go and source new transformers and find electricians to come in and make that work. And as I mentioned, the park being constructed in the late 60s and early 70s, most of this infrastructure is about 50 years old. I mentioned the management agreement that is referenced in the delegation agreement. That management agreement between the PAC and the property manager requires the city to prepare a physical needs report, and that was supposed to be done in late 2020, and that was to be used as the basis for the preparation of future capital expenditure plans. And so the city contracted with BKF engineers to evaluate the existing city-owned utility systems within the park, and that plan went and identified deficiencies in some of those systems. It also found that some of the systems were in good shape. It made maintenance recommendations, and it had different alternatives for future repairs or replacement. And then it also had an alternative of no action. The utility master plan was completed in February of 2021 and was presented and adopted to the city council in May of 2021. In addition, well, actually, going back to the findings of the plan, just to put some big numbers up on the screen because this is what's driving this conversation, there's a recommendation to reconstruct the private water system for the cost of almost $5 million, and these are in 2021 dollars, to line the existing sanitary sewer system with a cured-in-place liner that'll make that system seal up and not leak as badly and provide more structure to it, is about $9.1 million. And then eventual replacement of the storm drain system estimated about $4 million. It's important to note that the plan did not identify alternatives or cost estimates for the electrical service or the natural gas facilities. And that's because PG&E has really stringent standards for how those facilities must be constructed. And there's not enough space in the park, is what the report concluded, to cost effectively install those facilities per PG&E standards. And so the report mentions that PG&E has a process to get design exceptions for situations where the standards can't be met, but that would require a fairly detailed design, and that would require a lot of work with PG&E in order to be able to prepare alternatives. So there were no alternatives prepared for natural gas or electric. So we have an unknown there, and potentially pretty significant unknown. So there are other infrastructure needs at the park as well. The city every few years contracts to have a geotechnical evaluation done on the slopes surrounding the park. The park is set in a fairly hilly area, and there has been some erosion and small slides in the past. We had the 2017 geotechnical evaluation updated in 2021, and that report came up with 3 phases of slope stabilization recommendations. We also utilized our public works cost data for repaving city streets to come up with a cost to repave the 2.3 miles of streets within the park, as well as our recent costs to resurface the Hamilton Pool to generate an estimate for resurfacing the pool and spa. And then we have a line item in the current park capital budget to replace the clubhouse roof, which I was reminded earlier tonight we need to get going on. So with all of this capital need, with the utility master plan identifying these major, but long-term, but major infrastructure replacement needs, as well as the slope stability report and the other needs that we know we have at the clubhouse and at the pool and in the streets at the park, our next question was, how do we fund this long-term at the park? And so we prepared a capital reserve analysis to basically bring all of these items together. We spread the projects out over 30 years to try to, there were too many millions of dollars worth of infrastructure to put this into a 10-year plan. So we tried to spread it out over 30 years. And then we escalated the costs from the date of the estimate out to the year that project was to be delivered. And the analysis indicates a range of $40 million to $70 million worth of capital needs at the park over the next 30 years. Or in other words, $1 to $2 million per year of new funding needed to be able to take care of all of this infrastructure need. The large range is because on the low end of the range, I put in $0 for natural gas, $0 for electric, and $0 at the clubhouse. So just tried to pull all of those numbers out and say, okay, what's kind of a very, very low end range here? And then the high end range includes $5 million for each of those components, natural gas, electric, and clubhouse. We just didn't have good numbers or estimates to be able to put that together. So you get quite a range, but it's still a significant amount of money and more even at the lowest end than the park could support today. So I want to talk a little bit about PG&E's utility conversion program. I'll put this up on the slide, but I'll kind of breeze over it. Around the same time that the city completed the utility master plan, we had the opportunity to apply for the CPUC's mobile home park utility conversion program. And that program basically from the CPUC would fund the conversion of master metered systems like MVMCC has to individually metered systems, meaning rather than having one PG&E meter for gas and one for electric at the park entrance gate, that PG&E would take over ownership of those utilities within the park, just like most other streets in the city, and there would be individual meters at each of the coaches for their electric and gas service. And it's great because all of the distribution of the infrastructure for gas and electric would then be PG&E's responsibility, and it would only be private between the meter and the coach. So we applied in March of 2021 for an application, and then we have since met with PG&E twice, where they told us that the city would be responsible for the cost to upgrade those systems to meet PG&E standards before they were able to accept them as public. So at this point, this is another unknown, what these costs would be, if this is feasible, or if the CPUC and PG&E need to get on the same page potentially here. But I wanted to put this up on the screen because it's a part of the infrastructure conversation that we've had over the last couple of years. So some other financial considerations, in addition to the very large long-term infrastructure needs, the rents at the park have not been keeping up with inflation. The last increase, we believe, was in January 2016. It looks like that may have been the only increase, maybe in the last 10 years. It might have been 2 in the last 10 years. Obviously, our costs for maintenance, operations, and capital are going up significantly every year, and with the rents remaining flat, the gap between the expenses and the revenues is widening every year. Our analysis of the last couple years of budgets showed that the park's utility expenses actually exceed the utility revenues that are paid by the residents by over $200,000, and that's primarily, I believe, in water usage at the park that's being subsidized out of the revenues, the rental revenues going toward that utility expense. The city's loan agreement with Bank of Marin requires a minimum 2.0 debt coverage ratio. Basically, if you take all of the operating revenues and subtract the operating expenses and then divide that by the annual debt service, you need to have 2.0 or greater. And so as the expenses increase, with the debt service being fixed in that equation, our budgets have been getting closer and closer every year when we estimate at the front end to that 2.0 minimum debt coverage ratio. It's only a matter of time if we continue the practices before there could potentially be a default in the loan if we're not able to meet that coverage ratio. And that lastly, the park has operated a loss the last 2 years due to the capital expenditures. So the park has dipped into reserves in order to pay for capital expenditures. And we've had a couple large ones the last couple of years, particularly the pump station project is a really big one, $1.5 million project that we knew would dip into reserves. But the park is last year, and it looks like this year, will be operating in the red. And as I mentioned before, we're seeing we could need between $1 and $2 million per year of new funding for those long-term capital needs. Some other facts to put out there just for consideration for future conversations is one of them being the Novato Rent Control Ordinance. This was enacted in 1997 and restricts mobile home park owners' abilities to increase rents to 100% of the increase in CPI for the previous 12-month period. So if we went back and did the math, say it was 3.7% in the previous 12-month period was CPI, that means that the rent increase, the next rent increase could not exceed 3.7% per the city's rent control ordinance. Rental increase must be applied equally to all residents, and space rent cannot increase when the ownership of a mobile home changes, when there's turnover in the park. So if there's any thought of trying to establish a tiered system where newer residents would pay a higher percentage of these long-term infrastructure needs, knowing that they may be using them longer than other residents, the mobile home rent control ordinance restricts the city's ability to do that. Park owners are allowed to directly pass utility charges and assessments to residents. Utilities do not need to be subsidized. They're not considered rent. And park owners can apply for rent increases above CPI for certain capital improvements or to ensure fair and reasonable return on the investment. And there are other state laws that govern mobile home leases, utilities, transfers, and rent controls. There's been a couple new laws, I think one in 2019 and one in 2021. The state law that limits rent increases to CPI plus 5% or 10%, whichever is less. But the Novato Rent Control Ordinance is more stringent than that. And so, in summary, we wanted to bring this to the council's attention and start the conversation. We think that the staff's analysis is that the practices that the city and the PAC have had in the past in managing the park are not sustainable, financially sustainable long term. And so our recommendation is that the council consider scheduling a workshop in July to further discuss these issues and identify strategies to support the long-term sustainability, fiscal sustainability. And with that, I will put up the screen that shows the Zoom link, meeting ID and password for when we get to public comments so that folks can participate. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So bringing it back to council for questions. And I'm going to start on my left with Councilmember O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chris. I like the idea of holding workshops to identify a path forward. It's a very unique transaction and relationship, and finding the full story over the last 30 years has been challenging for me. So as I look back, it's clear residents have a lot of unanswered questions as well. So I think it's a good opportunity to kind of pick up. I think the last thing I could find was the last time we sat down with people out there to try and resolve this was 2008, 2011, in terms of identifying a long-term solution. So I think it's a perfect time to pick that up. I had a couple of questions. Has the park been self-sustaining up until now? So with all the ins and outs and deficits, have they been able to cover their own expenses?
Yes, it appears that way from our analysis.
Thanks. And so past capital improvements have been funded by the revenue that the property has generated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thanks. And then one thing I wasn't able to get a clear answer on, I'm able to kind of piece it together from different things out there, but do we have a definitive explanation for why the city purchased the park at the time?
I've gone back and done a lot of research with the help of our city clerk, trying to pull documents and read meeting minutes and try to put the conversation back together. But not being there myself and listening to those meetings, I feel like I'd be speculating, trying to answer that question. There may be folks in the room and there may be folks that live at the park that were around at the time. We have a lot of long-term residents, but I'd be speculating if I tried to answer that.
Fair enough.
I was there in 1997, so I'll be glad to explain that when I have an opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. It looks like I think it's Fund 651 was set up for the park. Are the reserves currently held there? And if so, can you tell me roughly how much is held there?
I believe the reserves are held in that fund, and they're approximately $5 million in reserves.
Thanks. And then I just had a couple of other questions. From fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21, utilities went up by nearly 50%. Do you happen to know what drove that change?
You know, I don't have that information with me right now. We can certainly look into that. Can you tell me the 2 fiscal years again?
From 20 to 21, and it's just the utilities line item and expenses. Actually, was my last question. No, I'm eager to work with residents to find a mutually beneficial solution. So thanks for bringing this forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Councilmember Frack?
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for that great presentation. I did have an opportunity to go by Marin Valley Mobile Country Club and got a tour. I just want to make sure I'm envisioning. So the workshop study session, what would that include? What does that look like? I just want to make sure I'm envisioning what you're thinking.
Well, obviously, all of it is at the purview of the council, but an option could be a less informal environment. In past workshops, the council sits down at the floor and sort of it could be square tables, whatever the format that you would like. Obviously, it's still a council meeting, it's still agendized and so on. Or we certainly could keep this structure if the council wanted to do that. But the thought was that tonight, to take this more in a step-by-step approach. We had obviously robust agenda, lots of other items. I would expect 3 or 4 hour meeting probably in July, and I doubt we'll get to real action that night. If I had to guess, there'll be a lot of exchange of dialogue back and forth, but it could be it could be facilitated. I mean, there's all kinds of options. It could be the type of meeting where you have large stickies up on the wall with problems, and people go around and write potential solutions, or I disagree with this. I mean, it's the sky's the limit. We would hope you give us at least some conceptual direction tonight, and then, give staff some freedom to really put that together from the philosophical view of what you would like it to be like, and then we'll do the nuts and bolts of actually putting it together. We don't have to land on a date tonight or, get that precise into the weeds. That's our recommendation. You don't have to do that all. You could say, no, let's bring this back in 2 weeks and we'll chunk this in 8 council meetings. I mean, it's whatever you would like to do. That's where we are, though. Our thinking is a workshop.
Okay. I mean, personally, I like the idea of a workshop because it's a more collaborative approach. And I do want to hear from the residents and work together with my colleagues. So that would be my preference. But, and then just on the debt coverage ratio, when are we projecting that to be over that 2.0?
Well, it needs to remain over the 2.0. So when we do when we prepare the budget every year, we try to run some calculations and make sure that the budget that we propose to be adopted, as long as the revenues and expenses come in fairly close, which they tend to. The park's been operating for so long, we have good, consistent data on the budgets, that we're not proposing a budget that's going to come in under that ratio. And I believe the last few years it's been getting closer and closer, like 2.03, 2.05 in our projection. And then the park manager does a great job of keeping the expenses low. So typically when the ratio is actually calculated at the end of the year with the actuals, it's been a little bit higher than that, but it has been getting closer and closer.
Okay, then we shouldn't have to worry about Bank of Marin if we're doing effective management with that ratio?
It looks like right now we're okay, but in the next year or two, it could be a problem.
Okay.
It's something we need to keep our eyes on.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilmember Eklund.
Thank you very much. So following up on that last question that Councilmember Farrak asked, why is it getting close to the 2.0? Is it the expenses or is it the income?
The expenses are going up. So, I mean, for example, utility costs. Everyone's utilities increased by certain percentages, and the revenues for the park coming largely from rents. And utilities is not a great example because there's separate utility fees collected. But let's say the park management, right? The property manager received a raise in last year, and so the costs of the property management group increase, but the rents have not increased since 2016.
So that's the question then, is because we have not been raising the rents commensurate with the expenses that have been going on.
That's certainly
and
driving,
that's why it's getting
us
closer to 2.0.
Yes.
So if we start raising the rents, then we won't get close to that 2.0, correct?
That would certainly help to stay away from there, but
Exactly.
the rents can, per the mobile home rent control ordinance, can only be increased by the previous 12 months CPI. So you could be in a situation where you have very, very high inflation happening, but the rents can only be increased by a lower rate because the year before had lower CPI. So there's still some potential for a gap. It can go the other way too.
So we need to explore that rent control, whether it applies to Marin Valley or not, because my memory, and it may not be correct, obviously, because 1997 was a long time ago. I don't think that rent control applies to city-owned mobile home parks. But that's in my memory. I think we need to look at that, whether that rent control does apply. I'm not sure. So the other question is, why haven't we raised the rents? If the last time we've raised them is when 2016, we have stopped having meetings out there. And if we do have a work study session, I'm going to really implore the council to have it at Marin Valley, because we need to engage all the residents that live there and to try to help in solving this issue. Because I am not interested in selling the park, and I will fight against that. I think that, so anyway, so why haven't we raised the rent?
So I'm not aware of any council policy direction on rental increases at the park, but it has been the practice, at least since I've worked for the city, that the city and the PAC, when we discuss the annual operating budgets, there's an intention to try to keep the rents as low as possible. And it just hasn't been the practice to have the annual rent increase by the maximum amount.
But
Like I assume some privately owned mobile home parks would be doing in the city.
If that issue was brought to the council, especially to me, I would have told you that has been council's policy at all. There was a downturn of the economy, I think, when we decided not to raise rents for a couple of years. And frankly, this issue has never been brought to the city council about whether or not we should raise rents. That's the advantage of having a meeting at the Marin Valley once a year when we do the budget, because that helps engage the residents on where we're going. So we're gonna have to have a discussion about that at some point to see if we want to go back to meeting out there. But that has not been the policy, because we raised the rent, and I was there in 1997. Obviously, I was on the council since June of 95. So within 2 years, Marin Valley came to us because the owner was going to sell the park, and they were concerned about the affordability. And so we were able to buy the park with the help of the Marin Valley residents, with the understanding that that was going to help us also to meet our affordable housing numbers too, because this is an affordable place for seniors to live. And it's a beautiful place for seniors to live. So, but anyway, so why has the park operated at a loss since FY 21-22? Why haven't we been informed of that earlier?
We bring the annual budgets to the council for adoption, and when you look at the budgets, the operating budget, the park is still operating in the black, but when you add the capital expenditures to that, overall, the park has been operating in the red the last couple of years. And I think we talked about the very large utility expenses that are going on with the sewer pump station and how that would require dipping into the reserves in order to fund those projects. I seem to remember discussing that when we were moving forward with that project in the past.
Yeah, I don't remember. You may have, but I really think that that's disappointing that we find it at this point. But it's hopefully at a place where we can have a conversation with the residents to find out what are the options for us. Because it was an agreement when we bought the park that the city was not going to go in the hole. We were supposed to be paying for staff's time, and with the contractor out there that we had, that they pretty much handled it until, I guess, recently. I'm not even sure. We haven't really had much information about Marin Valley for, years. Anyway, so another question I had is, why have we had a conversation with the PAC or with the residents about this issue?
Tonight is that first conversation. And if the council gives us direction to come back and do a workshop, obviously we can continue that. I did give the two members of the PAC board that I work with very closely in our 2x2 meetings a courtesy phone call to let them know this was coming, and sent them the staff report beforehand.
Okay. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you following up on this. I have a lot of confidence that we're going to be able to find some ways out, but I do, council, agree that we need to have a work study session, but I really believe it needs to be at Marin Valley. And because we need to elicit the support of everyone who lives out there and is engaged in it. Because I think that this keeps an affordable housing community for seniors, which we don't have that many of. So those are the questions. I have others, but I think that's more appropriate for us to ask in a work study session. And I'm not sure stickums up on a board is going to really get us there. I think we need to think through how the work study session is going to be done, because I think that we need to find other options. Like, I know that we can apply for grants to help with some of the infrastructure that may be needed because it is an affordable housing facility. But that is going to take some staff time and some research. So I think definitely we need to have a work study session to find a way that the city can, and the residents can maintain this relationship make sure that the city is not in the hole. And that was the agreement when we first bought, Marin Valley. We had a commitment to the residents there that we were going to really work to keep it affordable. So.
Great, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I think I know the answer to this question, but in the second restated and amended delegation agreement on page 10, I'm just curious, it talks about a periodic renegotiation clause. And I'm just curious, was there any periodic renegotiation that took place between December 1st, 2013 and October 1st, 2017, to your knowledge?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, I was curious just to make sure I got the numbers correct. I understand that over 33% of the mobile home spaces are required to be rented to tenants with very low or moderate income. And if I'm understanding correctly where we're currently at, there's 130 total out of the 315 total units, or 42% in that categorization. So it appears to me that we are meeting that goal. Is that correct? Are my numbers correct?
The delegation agreement identifies certain number of spaces that need to be rented out to residents meeting the three different income brackets. So if I remember off the top of my head, there were 32 spaces that need to be rented to very low, 33 spaces that need to be rented to low, and I think 65 spaces that need to be rented to moderate. When I looked at the most recent report that was certified by the property manager, all of those thresholds had been significantly more than met, I should say. So that rather than 130 of the 315 spaces, it was over 200, I believe, of the 300 spaces met those thresholds.
Thank you, Chris. And just to be sure then, when it talks about affordable space rent in that definition, do you know what that definition is? Because I couldn't find it, just to be sure.
I also could not find that definition. It's a good question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If we could follow up on that, I'd appreciate it. And then really appreciative of all the detail on the projected costs. I am curious about, because you did a really good job of laying that all out. I am kind of curious about the storm drain system. The estimated cost that was projected was about $4.1 million. And I'm just curious, I believe in the report it said that there's no need to revisit it now, but I'm just curious, in your estimation, when would be the best time to consider that specifically?
That's a great question. The utility master plan, when it talks about the storm drain system, mentions that it's in good shape and that it has I don't remember the years, but a very long lifespan, particularly compared to other systems like the water system and sanitary sewer system. It's in there as a placeholder. It may be that it doesn't have to happen in the next 30 years. It may be that portions of it need to be replaced in the next 30 years, but not the entire thing. Again, I was trying to get an idea of how much money should the city have in reserves, in the Marin Valley reserves, in order to be able to take care of all of the infrastructure at the park. That was the question we were trying to answer. And so I wanted to put line items in there, and I wanted to put dollar items attached to those things and then spread them out over time so that they were at least accounted for. And again, like I said, on the low end of the estimate, we put in $0 for gas and electric, and it's probably going to be something. Zero is probably not accurate.
Yeah.
We put in $0 for the clubhouse. It's also probably going to be something. That $4 million may be high on the storm drain system, but I think between there, it's going to balance itself out.
Yeah, no, I appreciated how you did the projected balances. I believe my last question for now is, I'm just curious, when the utility master plan was adopted back in May of 2021, it said that there was, in 2012, that it was $10 million needed over 20 years to cost to replace the park's infrastructure. And so I'm just curious from your impression, is it that there's been more items identified that need to be done, or that just the general, looking at all the costs increases with inflation and so forth, that the 2012 $10 million is now $40 million at a minimum? If you could just give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the 2012 study had quite a bit smaller scope than this reserve analysis that we did here. It didn't include street paving, right? It wasn't more of a full analysis like this version. And again, those are 2012 dollars, 10 million. So as you escalate those out over, say, 30 years, those costs go up significantly. We used a 3.2% inflator on the numbers.
Okay. So just in general, I'm thinking that specifically focusing on the capital expense and the utility reserves are our major focus areas at this time. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
And I think most of the questions that I was going to ask have been asked. And one of mine was curiosity as to why there had not been a rent increase since 2016. Just seems like an awfully long time. But we don't really have an answer to that, so.
I can tell you in 2020, when we brought the budget forward, and again in 2021, we did not recommend an increase because we were going through the pandemic and obviously the hardships that were happening at that time. So that's a part of it. The years prior to that, yeah, I don't have a great answer for you.
Okay, fine. Okay, and I will state that I'm very interested in a workshop, and I'd be, as long as staff is agreeable, I would think it would make most sense to do it probably at the park. Yeah. City Manager, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just on that, because certainly we can do that as we've done in the past. I mean, there is another thought, though, that would be less transparent. As example, we would not be able to record the meeting or publicize to anyone else. You would have to be physically present to ever have any knowledge of what happened other than very simple meeting minutes. So there is another thought. I have recognized the pull to want to go there, but is this larger than, is the city the five of you, or is it everyone in the city? So should everyone be able to watch and observe and participate and try to give you advice on how you should handle this situation? Or is that the exclusive right of just the residents, which would then, yes, be conducive of, so it's a little more philosophical for the five of you to decide, but we will not be able to record or publicize if you're there versus here. We have, you have over 40 people online, and of course there are people present as well. So far more participatory opportunities here, and then a recording is made for anybody as we struggle with, well, why did we do X and Y in 1998 and 2003 and so on? If we go out there, we'll be reliant on our amazing city clerk's minutes, and people like you 20 years from now would have to try to piece back together what happened there. So of course, we are at the work at the will of the council. We're happy to take the show on the road, but there is another side that I would hope the council would at least think about before you give us that direction.
So, Madam Mayor?
Okay, yes.
Thank you very much. It can be videotaped. We could hire the community television or whatever to do it wouldn't be live, but it could be taped over at Marin Valley. And usually, excuse me if I could finish, and usually at work study sessions, they are not televised. In the past, we've actually had tables there, but it has not been televised. So I think this is an issue right now for the residents of the park as well as the city, for us to have a conversation about how we, it's just not the city, how we are going to approach this issue. Because, and I firmly think that having a meeting out at Marin Valley would be very helpful because obviously this is their home. This is where they live. And they're seniors, and a lot of them, first of all, can't get out at night unless it's within the park, and because some of them don't drive at night. So I really feel very strongly that we need to have it at the park. We can make arrangements to have somebody tape it, and then you can put it up on the internet under the city council agendas. It just would not be live. But this is a problem that we have to solve together with the people who live in Marin Valley, in my opinion.
Okay, and we can further discuss that, but I'd like to go to public comment, and then when we come back, I think we should discuss that further. So I'd like to open public comment. I do have one card from Jay Shelfer. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you. Madam Mayor and City Council and City Manager. On the outset, I'd like to congratulate Chris for putting this all together. I have a feeling he had to do it fairly rapidly, and he got most of the facts correct. So we're very pleased that, again, we have a chance to review what necessarily has to be done to maintain Marin Valley Mobile Country Club as a home for low to moderate income people. Going back to the origination of the park, the bond agreement had in it that every 5 years this assessment had to be done. And as a result, we were able to then look at these issues on an ongoing basis, which was very helpful. When the park was refinanced by the bank agreement, the city staff took out a lot of those issues that what we felt gave us more insight into what was going on. But I actually brought that issue before the council at the time, but it wasn't looked at, and that provision was not put in. So Chris, I'm sure, had to scramble fairly quickly to put all this information together. And the facts are, for the most part, correct. I mean, the issues are certainly correct. And there are things that I think really have to be ironed out to get the facts together before a workshop, before the council, and before the other residents are actually put together. So I would propose on the outset to have first a workshop with the city staff, the PAC, and the management, who have been working with this problem for 30 years. So we are the ones that have our boots on the ground, and we know exactly what's going on. For example, the storm drains. When I first moved in 12 years ago, when it rained, Clubview Drive, which is that lower road, would flood. Right now, FEMA has it as a flood zone. So working with the new management, Matt, we cleaned out the storm drains, and then the city staff went down there with a front-end loader and cleared the drainage that went out to the streams that run down to the sewage place down there, Galenas. So now that water goes out, and even in these tremendous storms we've had this month, no water is on the street in in Marin Valley Mobile Country Club. So there have been issues that have been corrected, and presumably going forward.
If you could just wrap up your comments, your 3 minutes has passed.
Say it one more time.
There's a 3-minute speaker limit, and just if you could wrap up your comments.
Okay, so that's what I propose, that we actually sit down and iron out the facts to be able to present them in a more clear fashion. The PUC program that is perhaps going to be $10 million or more, they have actually done the work.
Jay, I do need to ask you to wrap up your comments. We need to stick to the 3 minute. I'm so sorry.
Okay, thank you. I tried.
Thank you so much.
So I'm looking forward to that meeting.
Thank you so much. I do have another two speaker cards. The first one is Steve Plocker.
Ploker, like poker with an L in it.
Okay, I'm trying.
Hi, my name is
Welcome,
Steve
Steve.
Ploker. I live at 51 Clubview Drive in the park. I've been there for 7 years. My profession is a CPA. I've been doing that in Marin County for just about 40 years. I am on the PAC board, and my job at our monthly meetings is to interpret the financials for our residents. And I'm here in this moment to say that we are not about to operate at a loss. We are not operating at a loss. If you look at the figures that Chris has given you for the capital expenses for the last 3 years, 700,000, 1,148,000, 708, two big but small capital projects have been going on at the park for the last 2.5 years. The first is clearing a lot of timber, trees, and brush from the perimeter of the park for the purpose of defensible space. But literally, we're like creating a park-like space around the park, limbing trees. So it's much more than just standard mowing and pruning that will later take place. But first, there's this huge first step. The other thing is even bigger. We've replaced one of the sewage lift pumps. Now that's actually going to be reimbursed by a grant the city has, but that expense is still on our books. And it looks like we've incurred that expense, but that's not going to be the case. So we're not operating at a loss, but expenses do go up, and they are getting tighter. And I'm usually the guy that stands up here and says we don't need a rent increase. And it's been convincing in the past, but I'm not going to do that again. A rent increase will be in order. Just lost my train of thought. The other thing, two more things. In 3.5 years, our loan will be paid off. That's another $650,000 a year. $50,000 a month, over $50,000 a month that's going to be available. Not to spend, but to put in the reserves or help us meet whatever comes up. And now the reserves. I did a study and spoke to this board about 4 years ago. Maybe Pat is the only one that is still here. That from 2008 to 2018, we put an average of $900,000 a year into the reserves. It was some years less, some years more. But that was the case. Now, the last few years, that hasn't been the case because of what we've been doing with these projects I just told you about. When they're done, there's probably nothing that's going to follow them like that other than things that are on this schedule, like the...
Steve, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your comments as well. Your 3 minutes is up. If you could just, there is a 3-minute time limit for speakers.
Okay. I speak for a lot of people. Can I get a couple extra minutes?
It's
Isn't
just
that
that
the
we
rule?
have a very long agenda. We started at 4
Oh,
o'clock,
yeah.
and this is going
Okay,
to
I got
probably
it.
go to midnight.
So my point is, we'll be able to make larger contributions to the reserves again, especially with the loan being paid off. And I think a rent increase will be in order. And certainly with these projects for the next 30 or 40 years, several rent increases, if not many. Okay?
Great, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Steve.
And thank you for buying and maintaining Marin Valley. It's a wonderful place to live.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you. And I will remind speakers, I'm sorry, I failed to mention at the beginning that there is a 3-minute time limit, which we do need to adhere to. And so I do have one other speaker card, Carol Joy Harris. Welcome, Carol Joy.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for bringing this up from Adam McGill and Chris Blanc, who did a yeoman's job of putting this together. So not very long ago, we had about $6 million in reserves. We spent $1.5 million on pump station number 2. There are 2 pump stations there. We are about to spend 1.5 million on pump station number 1, 3 million out of our reserves. But hey, Chris Blanc said to us, this grant, this federal grant money looks like it was written for you. He did the work, actually, he and Matt, our manager, did the work of applying for that grant, and I believe we received it, but it hasn't really shown up on our books yet, as Steve Ploker said. So that means that money that came out of our reserves is going back in, and that's 2 really huge projects. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the DSCR, the 2.0, that is required from that bank loan, just several months ago, we were talking about paying off the loan, because that's a huge amount of interest that we would be saving every year, and the loan balance itself. We were talking about paying that off. Should we pay that off through our from our reserves? We had the money, and Chris Blanc said, well, let the city staff study that and get back to you about whether we would then still have enough in reserves, what would be adequate for reserves. And we haven't heard back from that, and now we're hearing a whole other story. So I wanted to say that. And just one other thing about raising rents, it's my understanding that our park does fall under that that ordinance. And I remember, Pat, a few years ago when the council was meeting at our park, and the subject of rent increases came up, and a bunch of residents had a lot to say. And one of the issues was that there was going to be no increase in the Social Security payments that year. And Pat Eklund said, oh, really? Okay, then I don't think we should raise the rents. So at least for that 1 year, I remember, because I was there, that's why we didn't get the rent increase that year. So thank you. And then that's all I wanted to say, except that I agree that with Jay Shelfer, that I don't think this, personally, I don't think this could be solved in one meeting or even a series of meetings. I would propose a smaller committee, such as Jay Shelfer recommended, city staff and PAC and whoever else to really get the issues ironed out more concisely, so that the residents could then weigh in. And residents, of course, and council. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carol Joy. Laura, do we have any callers online?
We do. The first is Pat Higgins.
Welcome, Pat. Pat, are you there? If she's having difficulty, is there another caller?
I do see that she's unmuted.
She should just talk. Pat, just talk. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, we can come back to her. We have Anila Manning.
I'm sorry, what was the first name again?
Anila?
Anila?
Anila.
Anila. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Okay. First off, thank you for all the care and attention you're putting into this. And I know it's late, I'll keep it brief, but thank you for your care and attention. And it's going to need just as much care and attention going forward. I think Jay's idea of having a smaller consortium first, but before, and just making sure that everybody agrees on the facts. I'm not a mathematician. I don't understand how 200 low-income residents can suddenly make up a $70 million project planning thing, but not my purpose. Thank you very much for everything you do, and keep on the good work.
Thank you so much. Laura, are there any additional callers?
No additional hands raised.
Okay.
Pat Higgins has lowered her hand, so.
Okay, all right. Okay, so with that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for further discussion. Pat, I think you had some thoughts of what you would like to see, and then I'd like to hear from the rest of the council in terms of what they would like to see.
I'd like to ask Chris another question. Is that okay?
Yes, right, go right ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. So the suggestion has been made that a small group of the city, I guess you and Adam or whomever, sit down with members of the PAC and I guess to have a meeting to talk about this. What is your thoughts on that? Is that something that you could do before we have a work study session?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and at least in terms of maybe putting together a fact sheet, going through, getting on the same page. I'd be perfectly happy to sit down with the PAC. Again, the PAC is a committee governed by the Brown Act, so that meeting would still have to be agendized and noticed and the whole process. But it certainly wouldn't be as formal as a city council meeting, and we could have the park manager there as well. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I'd probably want to do that toward the end of June. It's budget season, and we're very, very busy.
I didn't hear.
End of June.
Oh, the end of June. Okay,
I'd want to. The idea of having the workshop study session in July is so that we can get through the city's operating and capital budgets, which include Marin Valley's budgets. It's a busy season for us, so we don't have a lot of staff capacity left to take on a big project like this.
And are we in a position to be able to start raising rents again this year at Marin Valley as part of the budget system?
If the council directs staff to do that, we certainly could do that as a part of our budget proposal.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that we're going to need to start doing that sooner than later. So I don't know, it's not on the agenda. So I guess we're going to have that agendized in the future. But if we are looking to try to figure out a way to get funds to be able to take care of these expenses that are coming up, I think we need to start sooner than later. I'm kind of surprised that we haven't raised rent since 2016, and I remember that. And I think it was Josh Friday. Josh Friday was also at the council meeting out there. And I think he was mayor that year, if I remember correctly. Could be wrong. But all of us agreed that when someone in the audience said that, it was just like a no-brainer. Okay, if Social Security is not going up, then how can we raise rent? So, but that did not mean that they should not have been raised after that. So I am kind of surprised that we haven't raised rent since then. But I think that's a good idea, frankly, for staff to meet with the PAC and any members, because it does need to be public for people out at Marin Valley. And I still think it's appropriate for us to meet at Marin Valley as well. And if we have to pay someone to videotape it, that's fine. I have no problems with that, because this is going to have to be a joint effort between the city and Marin Valley. And again, a lot of seniors are not able to drive at night. So I remember one year you guys rented it was when we bought the park, you guys rented a bus. And so everybody came to the city council meeting through a bus because they couldn't all drive. So anyway, that's my feeling. I think it needs to be at Marin Valley, and I totally support a work study session for us to start solving this problem so we can keep our affordable housing.
Great, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, any comments?
Yeah, thank you. I like Mr. Schiffler's suggestion. I would definitely support that. I would like to participate in that. I think as far as the rent increases go, if I understand correctly, again, that 42% are considered low income to up to moderate income. So to talk about a rent increase, perhaps that would incorporate those residents, but as well the 58% that are not in those categories, I think would be something to look at and propose. But I do believe that we do want to get to the heart of the matters and work together on this. I think this is definitely solvable. I've been out to the park and had Carol Joy and Jay Schiffler meet with me and was really impressed with the dedication and the support also of the management team. I feel like you really feel very comfortable with the management team today. So this is not insurmountable, and I think it's definitely a great idea that Jay has to do that. And I'd be happy to do that at the Marin Valley Mobile Country Club for that piece of it as well. Thank you.
Right. Councilmember Farag.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, and Councilmember O'Connor.
Thank you. Chris, thank you. I think you guys have done a great job of defining the problem. I'm definitely interested in hearing what the residents have to say in terms of discussing long-term solutions. I hear you, Councilmember Eklund, about you're not interested in selling the property. I'm not interested in forcing people to do things either. But I am interested in hearing what they have to say and what they want to do, because looking back from 2008 and 2011, they were interested back then in purchasing it. So I'd be curious to find out where that's at today. Again, I think it's a great time to have the discussion. July sounds great. I'm happy to meet out there. It's important that whatever solutions we land on, at some point we do have to fold the community into it because it is city-owned property. But I don't see that as being an obstacle in any way.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I mean, this is a heavy lift, and I think what's happened is, you know, Chris took a deep dive into what is the future of the park, and I think that's the analysis that's been done thus far is incredibly informative. You know, we all have our homes, and we know that roof only has a life of maybe 30 years, and the paint lasts, gosh, now it seems to be less than 10 years, and you constantly, I know what I'm doing. I'm thinking, I don't think that Europe trip is going to happen because I got to take care of one of these big expenditures. So to take a look at the park and everything, I mean, what's really got me concerned are the utilities. I think that's, you know, until I read the staff report, I wasn't aware of how they operated or didn't operate. That was all on the city. So certainly really important to stop and take a look. Is what we're doing right? Can we make improvements? What does the future look like? And it really, that's what I see that staff is saying. Let's just take a deep dive into this and see what direction we need to move in and how we need to get there. So I just have to commend Chris for doing this and taking a look at this. There is nothing worse than owning a piece of property and having it falling into disrepair. The sooner you attack things, the less expensive it is. I do agree with Councilmember Eklund. I think it would be better to have the workshop out there in the community house. I'm concerned some people who are older at night may not be comfortable driving and coming out here. I know it's easier here to do it here, but we did, when we did the general plan update, we had true workshops with workstations, and we even did it down at the depot years ago, an outside workshop that happened. So I think it's often just a better way to get the information out to people. More people will be there, more people will understand. And I think that's really important for all the park residents to really understand, what we're looking at into the future. So I'm very supportive of having a workshop come July. I think that workshop, it does seem appropriate to have it out at Marin Valley Mobile Country Club. I think there's probably going to be future workshops or meetings. This is not going to happen overnight. A lot of decisions to be made. So with that, I'm not sure if that's enough direction. It looks like Councilmember Eklund has something else to add.
Well, I was going to ask Gary, do we need to put this in a motion then?
Council can, but that direction is sufficient if staff finds that to be sufficient.
So I will put it into a motion that we move that we'll have a work study session at Marin Valley in July, and that we encourage staff to spend some time with the PAC and the residents after June 30th about this issue.
Okay, and is there a second?
Do you have something, Adam?
I'm sorry.
Could Councilmember Eklund, did you want to include that you want it recorded and us to hire appropriate staff to do so? And if so...
Sure. That's fine. And I'll include in the motion that we hire somebody to film it.
And the parks budget would pay for that expense, or the city would pay for that?
The park,
okay.
Yeah, the park pay for it, hiring.
Let me ask, I need a little more clarification on that. So, I mean, if that's going to be the way it's going to be, then we're all sitting, at tables.
So we haven't.
Is that
we
how
haven't
we want to do this? I mean,
we haven't taped them in the past. And so, in fact, we have never taped a meeting that we had at Marin Valley. And we've been meeting over there once or twice a year up until, I don't know how long it's been, 4 or 5 years or 3? Okay. So it was pre-COVID that we stopped. Yeah, so it was.
if
So do we need it televised?
Carol Joy,
I
if
mean,
you
not
want it,
televised, but taped?
pardon me,
Do we need it taped?
that, again, I'm going to look, okay, city manager's saying it's up to us.
Entirely up to you.
Yeah.
I'm not,
I don't think we need to.
I mean, I'm kind of leaning in that direction as well. I'm just thinking of many, many meetings I attended that were not. I mean, are we getting?
Study sessions or not?
But I would like to look to the city attorney, looking at today, is there any legal risk that we take by not filming it?
No, there's not. So you can hold a meeting there in person without that if you'd like.
Okay, so then I'll leave my motion as is.
I'd like to supplement the motion. I'm not hearing in your motion that there would be, I know you said to have the staff meet with the PAC and the park management ahead of time. Is that, so, and just to clarify,
Yes.
that would be sometime in June is what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd like to, we have most of our budget put together by early to mid-June, right, for the
Okay.
budget hearing. So sometime probably mid to late June would be ideal for my schedule.
Okay, so just to confirm my assumption then, Councilmember Eklund, that is part of your motion.
Yes, it is.
Because I think, and that has to be, if I'm understanding correctly, that would have to be part of the Brown Act and agendized. And I would like to participate in that specifically myself. And so is that part of the motion that you're willing to consider, that not only staff, but those of us that are interested, because, great interest in this, to add to that? So I'd like to be included in that if that's part of your motion.
So council members can attend that PAC meeting because it's public. And so we could sit in the audience, because I'm very interested too, because I've been involved with Marin Valley since '97. Because they have to notice it anyway, because they have to apply, they have to be in compliance with the Brown Act. But if we add it to the motion, and I'd be glad to add it to the motion, that council members can attend. And so council members can attend as a interested party. And there's no problem with if there's 5 of us that want to be in the audience, right? Because it's not a city council meeting.
That's right. All 5 of you can attend a properly agendized meeting of another Brown Act committee, in this case, the meeting that you're describing,
Right.
as long as you participate as part of that agendized meeting only and don't discuss other business.
Right. And so does that give you enough comfort that you're allowed and I'm allowed to do it? You don't need to include it in the motion? Is that okay? Or do you want it in the motion?
Well, I'd just like to make sure that in the motion, and maybe you already have stated this, that meeting happened before we meet with the general population.
That is what I said in the motion.
Okay.
May,
then
may I
Is
make a
that-
suggestion? I think there's an alternative here. Perhaps we direct staff to return with a schedule of meetings, and then that way we can see the full process, because it's going to be more than one workshop, right? And then that way you can kind of have a rough idea of when the first meeting's happening, when the workshop at the country club's going to happen, what's happening subsequently. And then that way we don't have to individually do each meeting or kind of draft a really long
Well,
topic.
we're giving direction to staff.
Right.
Right, okay, so, and the motion includes that Chris meet with the PAC and the residents out there before we have our workshop out there at Marin Valley. Whether it's in July or August, the dates are going to have to be set by staff. So they have suggested July is the workshop. And then Chris did say that he was going to meet with them before our workshop. So I was reflecting what staff was requesting. So, but obviously, if July's not going to work out, then they'll do August. But I think the sooner that they can meet, and then we can have a workshop so that we can start putting the pieces together to solve this issue, And it sounds like that some of the residents, and especially members of the PAC, have some ideas on how we can do this. And so we need to flesh those ideas out.
Okay,
and work
let's,
together.
I'll second the motion.
I'm looking at the hour. It's 10 after 9,
Actually,
I think so.
Rachel, you already,
I was going to second it.
oh, I thought you already had.
Okay, so you made the motion, and you amended the motion, and seconder?
It's not amended, it's the same
You
motion.
just restated it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Laura, will you call the vote?
Councilmember Eklund,
Aye.
Councilmember Farrar,
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connor,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Milberg,
Aye.
and Mayor Wernick.
Aye, and motion carries 5-0. And thank you very much.